Advancing the cause of liberty takes more than just coming up with ideas. It means making them happen. This is Society and the State. Life, liberty, and your pursuit of happiness. Now, your hosts, Connor Boyack and Brian Hyde.
Hey, welcome once again to Society and the State. Brian here along with Connor. We're going to touch on a topic here that I can't believe how violently some people react to this topic, but here we go, reaching out for the third rail. The immigrant caravan making its way up from Honduras and through Mexico. Some of the elements have arrived at the U.S. border with Tijuana. And Connor, I can't remember the last time I saw an issue that had people more worked up and in some cases deeply divided over the prospect of there's an enemy at the gate. Mm-hmm. And I take exception to the depiction of, this is an enemy, but there are some people very concerned that this caravan is going to be the thing that topples the republic.
I think to the biggest concern I've seen, Brian, and tell me your response to this, has been while people might otherwise sympathize with immigration or even illegal immigration, the plight of these people, one concern I've seen is that this is really kind of a concocted scenario. This is a manufactured event. I've seen allegations that these people were being given cash in Honduras to kind of get on the bus and get going. That George Soros is behind it to, create globalism and so forth. So to what extent are your views on this situation tempered by the potential that this is just one big stunt for a broader political manufactured crisis rather than a sincere effort of lay people to search for a better home?
Well, it's a two-parter because I think there are people who are sincerely traveling and trying to find a better life. However, look at the logistics of having thousands and thousands of people traveling for days on end. Somebody is helping to meet their needs in terms of somewhere to sleep, transportation, food, medicine, whatever it is. Yeah. And it would not be out of the realm of possibility for someone to be doing that for a political purpose. I know George Soros was the first one I thought of too, but there are those who are going to try to benefit on this without any real regard for the people who are kind of caught in the middle. In other words, I think there are people who are callous enough that if they can make a political statement with some kind of a confrontation at the border with these immigrants in this caravan and the Border Patrol or even the U.S. military, as long as it suits their political purpose, they don't care that these folks may end up as cannon fodder.
Sure. And we care. So let's talk about them, whether these people are unwittingly being used, knowingly being used, or, all the people who were just on their own coming every single day to try and get in the United States. It's not like this caravan is an isolated incident and otherwise we have no attempts by individuals trying to get into the border, right? So this is kind of a much bigger issue. So let's set aside kind of the political nature and talk about the broader issue. My contention, Brian, and I wonder if you disagree, is that I think we need a lot more caravans. I think notwithstanding the fear and the protectionism that has run rampant throughout immigration policy for decades, and we can get into that more if we need to, immigration is a net positive. Immigration is healthier for our culture. It's healthier for our economy. And fundamentally, it's the right thing to do to allow free individuals born with the same rights as you and I, even though they're on the other side of an arbitrarily drawn line on a map. It is in our collective interest to respect and honor their rights as much as we're trying to protect our own. Do you disagree with any of that, Brian?
Actually, I don't. Although I'm going to say I think you're very brave for putting that out there. We need more caravans, just based on the violent reaction. And look, I don't mean to disparage anybody who, is opposed to people coming into this country without permission. But at some point, don't you want to step back a little bit and just see if fear is becoming the dominant factor here, who is promoting that fear? And more importantly, who benefits from keeping people fearful and stirred up? Because the fear that is being directed towards this caravan, in my opinion, is way disproportionate to the actual threat that it poses either to national sovereignty or national security or, for that matter, our quality of life.
So we talked, Brian, in a past episode. We'll link to it on today's show notes page, which is societyandthestate.com/129. And we talked generally about the issue of immigration, kind of the underlying principles. So I guess if the point today is the caravan, what are we to make of this? From my perspective, events like this, while often manufactured for some political end, as we can concede here that that's likely the case, are nevertheless potentially helpful to force a conversation that otherwise wouldn't exist. When else are Americans even paying attention in any significant way to the issue of immigration to even talk about the issue? It seems like kind of in marketing, there's this idea of a tentpole strategy. You put the big, circus tent pole up, and then within that room of the tent, you can have all these other little marketing efforts. So think of, this new blockbuster movie is coming out. Let's say the new Avengers movie is coming out, and that's the tent pole. But then you have your merchandise, and you have your comics, and you have your toys, and you have your spinoffs and your YouTube videos. But it's all centered around this tent pole, this main thing. So in my mind, the Caravan is kind of a tent pole here. It's forced a conversation to which we can attach all these other kind of issues while we have people's attention on that topic. And from my perspective, the rampant fear that we see manifest with the Caravan gives us an opportunity, as you kind of alluded to, Brian, to have those people do a moment of self-reflection and say, wait a minute, let's really analyze this here. What is it that actually scares you? What is it that you're actually worried about? Because caravans have been arriving for decades, right? Since immigration policy really started clamping down. And things seem to be humming just fine, largely speaking, in America. We have lots of problems, no doubt, especially economically and welfare and so forth. But it seems like the problem, the hysteria does not match the problem. What are your thoughts?
Well, I'm hearing people start to use terms like they won't even describe them as it's military age males who are coming. Now they're starting to use terms like enemy combatant.
Oh, boy.
Which, I mean, that is just hyperbole. I posted an article on Facebook a few days ago from a pastor in Texas who had heard about this caravan coming up. And as a pastor, he was like, I want to get out of the politics and actually see what this is for myself. He went to Mexico. He traveled with the caravan.
Mm.
And what he found was, he says, look, the claims of violence, and, this is just a bunch of tatted up MS-13 gang members and jihadists, who are trying to sneak across the border. He says that is terribly exaggerated. The thing that he wrote about that really struck me the most was, he said, as he's traveling with the caravan, and it's all kinds of people.
Sure.
There's young and old, there's men and women, there's people with all different stories and all different reasons for why they are coming to seek asylum in the U.S. But he said the thing that surprised him the most was the kindness that was being shown to them by Mexican citizens as they were traveling through Mexico. And it was police officers, it was truck drivers, it was Mexican citizens and families who were reaching out and extending kindness to them as they were passing on their way through. Now, I don't know. Maybe he just got duped. It's possible that maybe this is just a great cover for the greatest, Trojan horse thing in history next to the Trojan horse itself. But he went to the source, and I at least have to respect him for going and talking to these people face to face. It's easy to keep someone as a caricature as long as they're in the abstract. Then they're less than human. They're bugs that need to be stepped on because they're going to make our lives terrible. But once you've actually talked to a person, it's pretty tough to maintain that kind of an attitude.
Brian, what does that say about us? Let's take this pastor at face value and his observations as accurate, where Mexicans are treating with kindness and so on and so forth. Perhaps the cynic would say, oh, yeah, it's easy to be nice when they're just passing through rather than camping in your backyard, right? But people showing compassion and support and love and interest or whatever versus the reaction we've seen from Americans to the caravan and wanting to keep them isolated at arm's length. What does that say about us, a society where we have this Statue of Liberty, give me your poor, your yearning for freedom and so forth, where once we kind of had a similar attitude, but now we don't? That's a reflection on us, an indictment of us, I think.
If only there were some contemporary example of people fleeing a failed country and being welcomed into a neighboring country. Like, oh, wait, there is one. Venezuela. People have been fleeing Venezuela because, look, it's in collapse, and it's a slow, awful thing to watch. At least 1 million Venezuelans have fled to Colombia. And you know what the folks in Colombia have done? Maybe not all of them, but enough of them have said, come on in. They've welcomed 1 million. I mean, we're talking about a caravan of a few thousand people, and people are talking like, well, this will destroy the sovereignty of the U.S. And when someone says that, I can't help but think, have you been paying attention to what your government has been doing? Because our sovereignty hasn't been real healthy, at least real sovereignty, where the final resting place of power is, hasn't been healthy for a long time. And it's had nothing to do with immigrants.
So proportionally speaking, Brian, just for context, I looked it up while you were talking. Colombia has a population of roughly 50 million. So that's 1/50th. Applied to America, we have what? I think about 300 million people in America.
330.
Roughly? Okay, so let me fix my math here. 330. That's the equivalent of 6.5 million people coming into the United States of America. That's amazing.
And you have to ask yourself, why would they welcome them? And I don't know the answer, but, you know, as far as the fact that they did welcome them, or the fact that there was people in Mexico showing them kindness on their way through, I have to believe, at least in part, it has to do from the fact that people have talked face to face with them and recognized these are people.
They've humanized it.
Yeah.
We've dehumanized it.
And people get mad at you if you point that out. Well, you just have an agenda. You're just trying to tell this touchy-feely,
sappy,
boo-hoo story. But, you know, if you can't see people as human, what does that say? If you're trying to view them through a political prism first and as human beings second, you might want to recheck those priorities.
A lot of these people, Brian, if not most, in the Caravan came from Honduras, kind of a failing state in the Central America, where I served a mission for my church and lived for roughly 2 years. I know a lot of these people, not specifically in the Caravan, but these types of people. I would watch as men would leave in search of a job in the United States to send money home because there was no work, because the politics and the economy were so disastrous that people were starving and they couldn't survive. It was a mess. We would encounter families all the time where it was just women and children, women and children, women and children. And it was very sad to see. And so I come at this from a little bit of a unique perspective relative to most folks thinking about this Caravan, where I can understand the plight of these people. And I see the women and children who are trying to flee a very toxic environment in which there's horrible gang activity. You know, the drug war has really infected things quite substantially. And, you know, the whole put yourself in their shoes kind of example is really what speaks to me and stuff like this, because if I were there, if I were in that circumstance, you bet your life I would be doing whatever I could to seek a better situation for my family. Now, a lot of people, just as you point out, go from Venezuela to Colombia, or they'll go from Honduras to El Salvador. You know, they'll just go to neighboring countries, similar cultures, similar circumstances, close enough to home, etc. But oftentimes people want to really level up, economically speaking, and it's perceived by them, and I think rightly so, that America can kind of hold out that hope for them to make some better money, position their family in a better way. I would want that for my family. I would consider it an injustice to have this massive wall where these selfish people on the other side wouldn't let me, you know, at least try and contribute. I wouldn't want to be a drain, and I think we could fix a lot of immigration policy if we said, if there was some way to contractually bind immigrants to say you disclaim all interest in any welfare benefits, come and take a shot. If you find a job, you find a home, you contribute, you work, don't be a dependence on the system, be a contribution. Let's welcome the hell out of everybody. Why wouldn't we want that, right? But my concern is for these people who I have deep sympathies for, whether it's people who are accomplices in a politically concocted caravan or the people who are arriving at the gates day in, day out. I would want that better life too. I would want to help my family. I would want to do anything I can to seek a better life. And the fact that Americans, generally speaking, we're making broad generalizations here, are not willing to go through that exercise, do not try and humanize it and have that sympathy or empathy for those in the situation, strikes me as kind of a deep slap in the face of the principles upon which our country was originally founded.
When you mentioned putting yourself in the other guy's shoes, that's the key element that I see missing here. And for some people to say that, it's, oh, you're just turning into, you know, a pacifist here. I hope not. You know, I mean, I believe in treating people, you know, as I would want to be treated. Something about the golden rule, things like when saw we thee a stranger and took thee in, stuff like that sticks in my head. But here's the reason why. I do try to put myself in their shoes, and I try to imagine what would it take for my situation to be so awful or so hopeless that I would risk everything take only what I could carry, and risk having to depend on the kindness of strangers to get myself hundreds or maybe even thousands of miles to a place where there's no guarantee, but I might be able to make a better go of it. And I've never been in a situation like that, so I can't speak from experience. Mm-hmm. But the one thing I do understand is that the moment I say, that would never happen to me, or why don't they stay home and fix it where they've got the problems? Mm-hmm. Those are the words of people who think that they will never, ever be the one looking for a better place than where they are right now. And I'm here to tell you, none of us knows that.
Yeah.
We don't know. Nothing is written in stone that says it could never happen here. And I hope it doesn't. But if that day comes, I think karma is going to be having a well-deserved laugh at the people who were so eager to turn them away as undesirables when they find themselves on the other side of that fence.
Brian, look at the migration between states. We have people fleeing states like Illinois.
Definitely.
Departing California. They don't stay and fix it. You know, deep Republican, capitalist type people who want to retain more of their money don't stick around trying to persuade a Democrat, corrupt legislature that has never seen a check it won't sign to suddenly, change its ways. No, they just leave. They go in search of a better life, and no one denies them that. No one considers them as being, doing anything wrong. Why is it that these arbitrary lines on a map have allowed us to abandon our principles? That, Brian, is why I feel we need more caravans, to force us to have a better conversation about this issue in this country, to come to terms with the principles that our forebears once cherished, and whether we're ready as a society to discard those principles and so-called move on or return to them is a debate I think we need to have. But I think events like this are healthy to force the conversation and get people engaged on the issue, where otherwise it's very easy to avoid it.
Hasn't it been interesting how many conservatives, small government conservatives, have suddenly rediscovered a love for law and order? And so they will say, the law says we have to do it this way, and there's a right way and a wrong way. And these are people who, just a couple of years ago under a previous administration would have been decrying unjust and stupid laws. We should just ignore those, or we should flout those laws. But now it's like our faith is in this law, which is going to keep us safe. And it makes me think of Alexander Solzhenitsyn, who spoke to the graduating class at Harvard in 1978. His speech is called A World Split Apart. One of the things he points out in there is he says it's bad enough. It would be a terrible thing to live in a society that had no legal structure whatsoever. But he said it's even worse to live in a society where the legal structure is the only structure to determine right and wrong. Because he says that legalistic mindset paralyzes our most noble impulses. And that's where people start, clinging to the letter of the law. Well, technically, I don't have to wash the poison off the apple. So, if your kid got sick from eating the apples from my orchard, well, sucks to be you, but the law says that you have no case. So I would just caution people, don't lean on the law when it suits your purposes, unless you want to see somebody doing that to you as well. But you got to have that capacity of putting yourself in the other person's shoes, and that's what's missing.
Great stuff, Brian. Guys, stick around for the next episode. We're going to be having a really interesting conversation with someone who's found a creative way to tackle the abortion problem. Make sure you're subscribed, share, societyandthestate.com. We have a couple links for you today to check out, including the story that Brian mentioned about the pastor. In the previous episode, we mentioned show notes page of societyandthestate.com/129, and we'll see you next time.
You've been listening to Society and the State. For show notes, archives, and more great content, visit societyandthestate.com.